Good morning, everyone. I'm Allison Sills, and I work at Central Carolina Community College, and that's in Sanford, North Carolina. We actually have 3 locations, but we're in the Sanford location. And I wanted to say welcome, everybody. Our presentation is called We're Not in Kansas Anymore, 3 Stories About Shifting to Academic Libraries, because this is the story of 3 librarians at CCCC who all came to academic libraries through unique paths. So let me share my screen. So there's the title. And who are we? I'm Allison Sills, instructional librarian. I got my bachelor's degree in English with an education minor, and I did my student teaching at Little Rock, Arkansas. When I was 22, I decided I was not old enough to be a teacher, so I spent the next 15 years working in casinos in Las Vegas. That was quite a change. After the financial crisis in 2008, I was told I was about to be downsized. They had a staff of 22, they went to 11, and I was number 12. So I was about to be downsized. So I did a thing. I jetted off to Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and I got a job as a paraprofessional in the academic library at Zayed University. That experience inspired me to go back to school to get my master's in library science. And my focus at UNC was public librarianship, because when I moved back to Sanford, my goal was to work at the library down the street. And I did get that job, and I loved it. But there were several reasons that I wanted to make the jump back to academic libraries. And now I'll let Mari introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mari Wimberly. I was an English major. I got my master's degree in library and information studies at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I chose the dual program for school library licensure and public library certification. I was interested from the very beginning in academic librarianship and in archives work and special collections, but I wanted to stay in my immediate geographical region of Central North Carolina, and there are not a lot of jobs in that sector of librarianship compared to school libraries or public libraries. So my first jobs were as media coordinators in elementary schools. That didn't end up being a good fit for me personally. Besides, with all of the changes that are constantly happening in the school system, I was not assured of my job stability for the future long term. So I decided to switch to public library, where I worked in a paraprofessional position in a small town branch for almost 4 years before being hired as the manager of a youth services department in a larger metropolitan system. In all these libraries, I had the opportunity to work with amazing people, but looking at my personal long-term goals in connection with the goals of these libraries, I eventually realized there was a disconnect. I liked everything I was doing. About 2 or 3 months into each job, I would always think, I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life unless a comet hits this planet next Tuesday. So a position opened up for a digital services librarian and archivist at Central Carolina Community College, and the job description sounded like everything I wished I had done to begin with. I have been here for 9 months now, and I feel like I've finally come home. So I will pass it along to Morgan now.
My name's Morgan. I'm the Outreach and Assessment Librarian at Central Carolina Community College, and I actually started my career with an undergraduate degree in English with a focus in creative writing, and then I taught some developmental reading classes at Forsyth Tech Community College, and I thought, oh, there's so much more I can learn. And so I went to graduate school, got a degree in English. I taught for a few years at Appalachian State as a rhetoric and composition instructor, non-tenure track faculty, but it was a great learning experience. I realized that I loved teaching, but absolutely hated grading. And so I thought, what can I do that would allow me to continue to teach and be creative and excited about learning, but not have to grade anything at all ever? And librarian was a great option and opportunity, and it allowed me to use all of my skills, but to move away from the things I felt were, I don't want to say detrimental to the learning process and experience, but I felt were not as critical to learning. So I got my degree in library studies from University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and then I applied and got the job here. And it has been great.
Thank you, Morgan. So, well, let me go here. So we're going to tell you today about how we got into academic libraries and what did we learn along the way. So I'm going to talk about coming from public libraries to academic libraries, and what did that acronym stand for again? Some of the similarities between public libraries and academic libraries. After I graduated with my MLS in 2015, I found myself working 2 part-time jobs 7 days a week. So one job was as a library assistant 40 miles away, and the other one was right here at CCCC as an evening librarian. And I loved both jobs, but neither was able to offer me full-time. And 2 part-time jobs with 1 significant commute, it just wasn't a healthy work-life balance. So when the public library a mile away from my house offered me a full-time job, I went for it. And it was my original goal anyway, because who doesn't want to work that close to their house? The similarities between academic and public librarianship are many. You're still serving patrons, but the needs of your patrons are different. Instead of helping patrons with mostly physical books like in public libraries, in academia, you're mostly helping students find databases to fulfill their classroom requirements. And you can feel the stakes are a little bit higher, helping someone find resources for a class that leads to a grade, that leads to a degree, that leads to a career, as opposed to helping a public patron find a book that they will read for entertainment. Both are really rewarding, but helping someone change their future it's just a very good feeling. And collaboration, you do in both situations, and it's vital for public library work. But you might be working with just a small team of programmers and then on your own a lot. In academia, you're now working for many campus departments, and you're helping potentially thousands of students across many disciplines. We've instructed classes in many fields, not just English, of course, you think about that, but dentistry, biology, really any class that requires research. And collection development is similar in that you're still buying books, but unlike in public libraries where you specialize in current topical books, academia requires more subject-related nonfiction based on the fields your college offers courses in. So instead of relying on like the New York Times bestseller lists, if you go into academia, you'll have to pivot to new sources and lists and really deeply research many fields that you may not be familiar with. And this is also where the collaboration piece comes into play, because the first thing you might do is reach out to your instructors in the disciplines to ask for suggestions. And both involve public speaking, but again, the stakes are different. So in public libraries, your audience is often children, and the stakes are helping them develop early language skills and the love of reading. In academia, teaching is done in front of a classroom, and your teaching skills that may help students become more independent, get them the college degree, will help them succeed in life. So the stakes are different. You would have to consider your tolerance for public speaking and which stakes you prefer, helping young children or helping college students. And the differences, some things are very different. In the public library, the pace can be rapid, very rapid, and staffing can be often insufficient. And this leads to more work spread across fewer people, and that leads to very real burnout, which can lead to high turnover, which just compounds the staffing issue. Because of staffing issues in 5 years, I worked every job in the building, from storytime to kids to YA to adult programming to cataloging to tech services. I ran libraries, Comic-Con. I did it all, circulation. In academia, on the other hand, it's a less chaotic pace, and you're more focused on an objective. You also are allowed more contemplative moments to really think things through. Instead of like in the public libraries, you have to do your thinking at home because at work you're pedal to the metal. The work-life balance can be very skewed in a public library because you're working nights and weekends, and the pace of the public service also prevented me from attending many multi-day conferences. I only went to 1 in 5 years. In academia, personal growth and development is encouraged, and so is attending conferences like this one. Another difference is the age of your patrons is different. In public settings, your patrons are older and they love their large print materials, or they're very young and they have their picture books. Public libraries are famous for their children's summer reading programs. In academia, most students are between the ages of 16 and 44. So you catch the ones in the middle. And programming is different, as I mentioned, with the similarity of the public speaking, but what you teach is different. Academia offers mainly instruction versus enrichment. But at CCCC, we do offer a wide selection of YA books and graphic novels too. And the real selling point for me, I honestly have to say, was that security was very different. In my experience, the security offered in public libraries was inconsistent and often absent. I personally witnessed several, let's just call them incidents, that did not make me feel safe at all. To quote Blade Runner, I've seen things you wouldn't believe. In my academic setting, there is visible security patrolling all hours. Security regularly walks into the library, and security was a significant selling point for me leaving the public library. And things you'll learn: acronyms and lots of abbreviations. Just the last list of classes is daunting and they can be misleading, like geology is not GEO, it's GEL. And academic success classes is not ASC, it's ACA. LMC isn't a car part business like I thought at CCCC. It stands for Lee Main Campus, and I had to ask what that was because everybody was using it and I didn't have any idea. And speaking of the campuses, CCCC has 3 main campuses and many satellite locations across 3 counties. So if you're considering switching to academia, you may need to learn new buildings as well as new departments and new locations. And you'll also learn to navigate a new annual rhythm, which is slower in the summer and busier in the fall and spring. We just went to 10-hour days, 4 days a week to conserve energy for the summer. This is the opposite of the public library, with summer reading is the busiest time of all. But many of us remember the rhythm of our own academic studies, so the transition feels the most natural. I loved working in academia environment. As I've said, my first job was at Zayed, and I finally feel like I've come back to it. All of the similarities and differences suit me the best, but everybody's choice is different and is based on many factors, and things I experience may be completely different to where you are. So thank you, and I will hand this over to Mari.
Thank you, Allison. So my portion of the presentation is entitled Finally an Academic Librarian, from school librarian to public library paraprofessional to youth services department manager. And I think somewhere in there, I was actually a substitute teacher, K-12, for a few months. So one thing that has always been a part of my professional experience is I love kids. I thought I wanted to work with them, but I didn't. That doesn't mean I love kids less. It just means that I don't want to work with them professionally. I am also the kind of person who is interested in everything. There are things I'm interested in, and then there are things I'm not interested in yet. I don't think that there's anything outside of those 2 categories. Sometimes being interested in an awful lot makes it difficult for me to narrow down my focus professionally and personally, because everything I see is something that I want to look at and get involved with. So let's see. People constantly ask me, what is the biggest difference in teaching children and teaching adults? Because so many people that I know remembered me as an elementary school librarian, and I try not to get too much into that. A room of 40 children is a very, very different thing from a room of 40 adults. So when I was thinking about the similarities and the differences, this is what I came up with here. The number one biggest similarity I've found in all 3 of my explorations of librarianship is the low digital information literacy of all my library patrons when it comes to using technology as something other than a toy. I have witnessed patrons of all ages and backgrounds, even those who are on the privileged side of the digital divide, struggle with learning how to retrieve information, navigate databases and websites, and locate reliable resources to fulfill given tasks. With K-5 students, this is obviously because they're being exposed to these things for the first time. For many students, learning in elementary school how to access and use their school library catalog is going to be their first experience with the database. They might not really have any other until they get to college. In public libraries, I spent significant amounts of time with adults who needed assistance accessing and navigating websites related to healthcare, job applications or benefits, social services, or retirement. Teaching database navigation in an academic setting didn't feel like unfamiliar territory at all. I had the same situations of learners who were often very new to anything that wasn't a simple Google search or an entertainment platform. So meeting patrons where they're at, taking the time to observe and accommodate their comfort levels, and offering a judgment-free, friendly, reassuring environment applies to all library situations. Reference work is also very similar across the board. It's just the subject matter that's different here in academia. I was a little bit intimidated when I switched to academic library because finding a specific peer-reviewed journal sounded to me, scarier and more serious than helping someone Google community resources. I realized pretty quickly, though, that the issue was almost always students not understanding where to start or what keywords or search strings to use, how to talk to the database, which is something I'm very good at, as opposed to me being required to understand the actual content we were retrieving. And just like with public libraries, students do sometimes assume that I understand all the content too. And I'm very upfront with them and saying things like, does this look helpful, like a helpful result to you? Is this what you need for your project? This is what I'm seeing here, but I'm not an expert in, the respiratory tract of horses or whatever it is that they're looking for. And they'll laugh and they'll feel better because they might know something that I don't. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story really quickly here. When I worked in a public library, a gentleman came in asking for help typing up some handwritten notes, which we do a lot. He was trying to get his pilot's license and had created a checklist of everything he needed to do when he got into the plane to prepare for takeoff. So I got it all into a Word document for him, got it formatted as a checklist, and he said, well, does that look like everything to you? And I said, sir, I am a librarian. I am not a pilot. I couldn't tell you the first thing about an airplane. Please have your flight instructor verify this before you use it. I can't take responsibility for it. So presumably he did. I hope he's okay. Anyway, that's my favorite example of how much confidence so many people bring with them to all libraries. Practicing good communication skills and being honest about my own informational limitations is the same in any library job. We want to build trust in our community. And on the subject of community, another huge similarity is the commitment to services. This has been the same everywhere I've worked. All of you here today know how much libraries have to offer to the community, and it is amazing how underutilized so many of these services are, and how even people who are very vocal about loving libraries might not realize all that we have available. Slide, please. So as far as differences go, Allison covered a lot of the differences in policy and pacing and expectations, all of which I experienced too, especially the security point. So I'll focus a little more on the overall trajectory of academic librarianship, some of which will tie into the last thing I'll be talking about. So the everyday tasks and skills of librarianship everywhere are basically the same. We all took the same core classes in library school. We all use these same basic skills, but just in different proportions. There's sometimes an attitude that one type of librarian just might not be able to understand or develop the job skills that another type of librarian has. But in my personal experience, that's not true. Related to that, the focus is different. As Allison pointed out, it's on academics. It's going to be on research first and foremost here, not leisure, not entertainment. As I've grown and developed as a librarian, I've found that more than anything else, it's the information science side of my degree that interests me more professionally and personally than the reading and books side. I always feel a little bit guilty about confessing that I don't actually read as much as non-librarian people assume that I do. And when I do read, it's usually nonfiction. So I do have reader's advisory skills, but they're not my strong point. I prefer a library where a larger proportion of my time is spent helping people retrieve information as opposed to recommending the next great read. And the perception is different. We all know stereotypes about librarians, and I think we all know that even within the field of librarianship, there can still be stereotypes, that a school librarian is going to be a certain way or a certain type of person, that a children's or teens or adult services librarian in a public library will be a certain way. I'll come right out and say that I had some vague notion that academic librarians were going to be less fun than public librarians, and that if I joined an academic library that I'd never see leisure or enrichment programming again, I had no idea that my current academic library team was going to end up being the most fun, creative, organically collaborative group of people I've ever worked with. And since I've worked with amazing librarians everywhere, that's saying a lot. Slide, please. So to conclude my portion of the presentation, I want to underline how multifaceted, how diverse librarianship is, and talk a little bit about how that's a huge bonus for the future of our profession. When I worked as a manager, I had the opportunity to sit on an interview panel, and this was a fascinating experience for me, given how many times I'd sat at the opposite side of that table in the past. I know we're all aware of the trends and shifts and changes that are coming to our field, but this is one that particularly interests me: a possible shift in hiring policies and requirements for job candidates. In a staff meeting, one administrator in the public library system said that it was time to overhaul the process by which applicants were selected for interviews, because focusing on only hiring people for public library jobs who had a public library background could be eliminating really strong candidates with other backgrounds who could bring fresh perspectives and unexpected skill sets. She specifically mentioned considering school librarians for public library roles. And of course, I wanted to jump up and down and applaud at that point. I think we all know that career paths these days are becoming less and less linear. I hear all the time about people starting out in one field and ending up in a completely different one, including people who are well known for their accomplishments. Your best candidate might not be your most obvious candidate. Someone who's lining up with all the traditional requirements might end up just being the easiest candidate. As hiring managers, it's time to start breaking down the internal, sometimes unquestioned barriers to creating strong teams, especially within our own fields. Now, I'm not saying that all librarians are interchangeable, or even that every individual librarian could be wildly successful in any library role. I'm saying that a really good interview question is, how do you believe that your past experience has prepared you for this role? And I just want to say I'm really happy that I was given that chance. I will pass it along to Morgan now.
Hello. So my transition into academic libraries is one that seems straightforward, but was a lot more complicated. So I moved from rhetoric and composition instructor at Appalachian State to the role of librarian. And you would not believe how hard it is to convince folks who are doing the hiring in libraries. The skill sets that we use in libraries are already in academia. Just because I don't co-teach with someone doesn't mean I don't know how to collaborate. Just because I'm not actively doing collection development doesn't mean that I don't know how to investigate and build a collection. It was really hard to convince people that I could do the job. And that was probably the most challenging part. But once I got in, and once I was able to kind of get situated in the library, there were a lot of similarities and there were a lot of differences. So next slide, please. The first similarity was that the classes and workshops were very similar. Obviously, there's a difference versus having a semester-long class and a one-shot instruction or workshop session, but essentially, it is an opportunity to provide information to students in engaging and fun ways, and that was very similar. So that didn't feel like such a stark difference between the classroom and the library. The second thing is student interactions. I was interacting with students on a day-to-day basis in the classroom, and that has not changed as I moved into the library. Very much the same kinds of interactions I was having as an instructor. In fact, as a teacher, one of the comments that I got from students that they were constantly sort of asking me to improve was, they said, she seems more like a guide than a teacher. She doesn't just tell us what to do. She just helps us along. And from a teacher, they wanted that to be sort of, I have the information, you do the thing. And that's just not, I just don't really do that. That's not really how I teach. That is really great for a library because that style is really kind of where the librarian fits, is that guide on the side versus what we'd say is the sage on the stage. And so that was really quite a nice transition because it was what I was already doing. The other thing is grading and assessment. As an assessment librarian, basically I'm doing the same things I was doing with grading, which is identifying learning outcomes and evaluating the achievement of those outcomes for the long-term success of the students, but also the library and the activities that we do there. And then collaboration. I think sometimes there is a misconception that as an instructor that you work solely by yourself, especially in college, that you teach your own classes and no one helps you and you get to decide. That is partially true. You do get to decide a lot of what you do, but you're still on committees and you're still participating and collaborating with others in ways that help shape how you teach and the ways that shape how you interact with students and what you choose to present in class. And so we did a lot of collaboration when I was an instructor, and those skills are all transferable to the library. All right. So some of the differences, obviously there's a lot of differences, but the time constraint is probably one of the most significant differences. When you are teaching in a semester-long class, you can say, okay, we didn't finish this on Monday, but I'll see you on Wednesday. Whereas when you're a librarian, you have those one-shot instructions and you may never see those students again. You can hope that you will, but there's no guarantee. And so the one-shot instructions allow the class to be very self-contained, which can make it a challenge if you're trying to cover a lot of material. The other sort of aspect of teaching semester-long classes versus one-shot instruction is building the relationships. A shy student or a student that maybe doesn't want to speak up might not speak up the first day of a semester-long class, but maybe mid-semester they're chatting with you, they're opening up a little bit, they're building that relationship with you so that you can know how to help them better and more effectively. Whereas in a one-shot instruction, especially if you don't see that student consistently around the library, they may be less likely to come up and be as open with you. And I understand that. I get where they're coming from. So it's really a matter of how do you make, in the shortest amount of time, the class feel the warmest and the most comfortable and the most exciting and inviting so that anybody, whether they are shy or more outgoing, can participate. Of course, obviously, there's the universal design for learning. There are strategies for inviting that kind of response, but it is a much shorter amount of time in the one-shot instructions. And then the teaching styles. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but typically in my teaching, I really just like to have the students dialogue. So I'll ask questions, I'll wait for responses, I'll give activities, we'll do lots of different things. But a student may not necessarily have that same opportunity with the instructor of the class. Like as a librarian, you might invite them to dialogue with you. But if the instructor is more of a lecture-based instructor, the students may not have the practice that they typically would need to be successful in a more dialogue-based class. So it is kind of challenging figuring out what the instructor of the class does in their class and how to make the class in the one-shot instruction a little bit more inviting, because you want it to complement what the teacher's doing, but you also want students to take ownership of their learning experience. Next slide, please. All right, so some new tips for instructional librarians. Be open to trying new things. There's lots of new things to try. Just at the core of it is the activity or the idea, whatever you want to do, is it student-centered? Does it meet them where they're at? Does it address the needs that they currently have? Does it think about where they are next? The next thing would be to collaborate and defer. So work closely with the instructor to figure out where your expertise is and where their expertise is. So allow the expert in the room to lead the portion of whatever it is that you're doing. And that also includes the students. I didn't write that, but like Maury talked about, the students often come in with their own expertise. So if they are an expert on the topic, they get to lead the conversation. And if you as a librarian are like, okay, this is what I'm identifying the student needs, then you can kind of push the conversation in that direction. So who's the expert is really the person that should kind of help to guide where that conversation is going to go. And then get up and moving. So the most important time that you spend in your teaching and your instruction may not actually even be in the classroom. It is about getting out and meeting people in the library. So, and outside of the library. So I don't like to sit very long. I like to get out and meet people. And we have a lot of shy students where I work. They're new to academia. It's maybe a little bit more challenging for them as they enter the academic world from their particular backgrounds. And so by getting out and walking around and seeing them in the hallways and being like, hey, how are you doing? You know, creating a conversation. That way, when they step into the library, they already know somebody. They already have had a conversation with me. And it might be about what they're researching, or it might just be, hey, I see you and you see me. And they might open up a little bit more. And obviously, you don't have to run up to every single person and be like, hi, my name is, and then I'm going to talk to you about, you know, the newest interest that I have. It could just be that you're walking around, a new student needs directions, and you're just in the right spot at the right time. So the library is great, but don't stay there. That would be my biggest suggestion. All right. Next slide. That's all I have. So any questions?
So we don't have any questions in the chat, but if anybody would be interested, if anybody has any questions, just go ahead and throw them in the chat. We can present them. Okay, we got a question from Paul Worrell. As y'all presented, I was thinking inversely how there are some amazing skills that having prior experience in public libraries helps you in academic libraries. I know I suck at reader's advisory comments.
There are a lot of skills that translate between public and academia. The collection development is the most significant. I learned a lot there. Even the cataloging, I was the cataloger over there. It's helped me here. We came across a book that appeared to be written by ChatGPT. And so that was collection development and cataloging. And the skills that I had in public libraries, identifying self-published writing, helped me identify that book and determine that maybe we wouldn't include it.
I'll say that the unexpected nature of public libraries really prepared me for academic libraries. Here in academic libraries, the run of a general day is a little bit more predictable, even when times of the semester are going to be a little bit crazier or more things will be happening. Even those tend to be more predictable. Working in a public library and just never knowing what was going to come in or who was going to need help with something very, very in-depth and one-on-one, that the nature of that prepared me, because now when students set up research appointments or when someone has a question, I don't get overwhelmed. I have seen, as Allison said, a lot of things, and it's much harder to be surprised having had that background.
And we collaborate a lot on the teaching. We have done a couple of videos, instruction on research, and each one of us, when presenting, would take a certain part of the research process, and we would talk about it together so we could break it up and work together, and more hands make less work kind of thing.
For the outreach, when we think about like collaboration, so between, let's see, I think it was February of 2022 and February of 2022 and August of 2022, I was the only librarian on the Lee and Harnett campuses. So it was just me. And what we really found was that the instruction really wasn't the request for instruction from teachers was not as high as we were hoping. And so we went around on the campuses and introduced ourselves to everyone. We brought candy. And so we just walked around and said hello, and we just made sure that they could see that we had more librarians and that we were so excited to help them. And we would just, and I'm sure it was somewhat disruptive to the normal traditional day, but we would just walk into the office and I'd be like, hey, I'm Morgan. I can't wait to talk to you about the new librarians. And then we would just chit chat about, look at all these resources that are available to you. Isn't it exciting? And then we did see an uptick in some instruction requests. And so I think some of the outreach is just actually like we were talking about, getting out of the library.
Stephanie is asking, could you talk more about what, if any, more non-traditional transferable skills you found most helpful? I will say that for myself, having worked on specific projects and describing how those projects worked out, whether I was interviewing and people were asking me that, or just in general, anything that I've been involved with that was creative, anything that I had to help organize, collaborative efforts that had a very specific goal, like an event or a presentation, anything that demonstrated a lot of initiative and a lot of leadership, those are all very helpful goals when transferring between jobs. A lot of interviewers look for things like that. When I talk about the more traditional skills, it's having worked on a reference desk, having, if you're in public library, given a story time. But a lot of these things that maybe people outside of a specific facet of librarianship haven't experienced, anytime that you can describe being involved with something and working with other people on something that was not an assigned group project, those are all very interesting. And knowing how it came out, or if it didn't work out, then why. Those tend to catch attention.
Another thing I noticed is that when I was running PopCon, we tried to do a lot of advertising for it. And so I spoke on a lot of radio shows. I even did the local television station, very small, but that kind of advertising experience it translated here because one of the very first things they asked us to do was the radio station wanted to interview us to talk about the library. So that was a skill that I brought over from the public library.
Michael asks, how do you go from being a jack of all trades to a specialized focus? I was the everything at my library. Michael, I was the everything at one of my libraries as well. And honestly, for me, it was a relief not to be. As I said before, I am interested in everything. And it has been very interesting and personally for a lot of personal growth that I've been able to actually focus on just a few things, or to still focus on several things, but be able to go more in depth on them. I've been able to find out that some things, for example, I was not as interested in them as I had originally thought. And other things, I've ended up going in a completely different direction. I've gotten a lot more, for example, into archives work and researching things like how to care for special collections. So I see it as opportunity when I go to a specialized focus and a way to really hone that skill now that I have the time for it and now that it's actually a part of my job description, as opposed to one more thing that I had piled onto a bunch of other things.
I think you also go from being a jack of all trades to a specialized focus by taking that moment to pause and say, guess what? I don't have to do it all myself anymore. So now when an instruction request comes in, I just let Allison take it away. Like, they might be on the Harnett campus. I'll say, I got it. I'll grab it. That's where I'm at. But for the most part, I know Allison has got it. She's going to take care of it. When someone asks me an archives question, it's like, let me check with Mari. So it's this great opportunity to honor your coworkers for all of the great skills that they bring. And so you get to really appreciate the people that you're with, because other people can do the stuff with you.
And it's great having a team for that. I will add, there is a little bit of an adjustment period, a little bit of anxiety that comes in with suddenly not being responsible for, everything in the world anymore, and just getting used to, as Morgan said, having other people who also know how to do things.
It can be a great relief. to let it go. You don't have to catch all, and you don't have to run around and make sure that every little thing is being taken care of. It's really a relief.
Any other comments or questions? Seems like a lot of people are really relating to y'all's message.
Yes, Jen and Andrea have both added sometimes in academic libraries, you're still going to end up wearing a lot of hats.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess going from jack of all trades down to just focusing on one, enjoy that time that you have to focus on just a few skills, but definitely keep those other ones in the background, because you never know when you might end up needing them again. And yeah, definitely don't forget anything you've learned.